Good morning and welcome to the June meeting of the Housing Opportunity Fund Advisory Board of the URA. We are going to get started. If you require ASL interpretation, we have L&B. If you can follow along on your screen, you can also, the meeting is also being transcribed live, so you can also view that there. All right. Begin with our roll call. Lena Andrews.
Here.
Oliver Beasley. Dr. Jamil Bey.
Here.
Joanna Deming.
Here.
Knowledge Build Hudson. Jerome Jackson. Council President Teresa Kill Smith. Mark Masterson.
Here.
James Myers. Marcus Reed. Dr. Paul Spradley. Sonia Tillman.
Here.
Derek Tillman.
Here.
Adrian Monaha.
Present.
I am present, Kelly Ware, and Megan Winters. Okay. So I believe we are one or two people short from approval to approve the minutes. So we will move this a little bit further down in the agenda, as I anticipate that we will be joined by more folks shortly. But we will begin with public comment. Do we have any registered public commenters, Jad? No? Okay. We will now move on to a presentation on fair housing by Megan Comfrey. Looks like Megan needs to be allowed to unmute herself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Excellent. I apologize for my incredibly bulky headset. I am having a technology problem and wearing this to get through virtual meetings. But thank you for having me. My name is Megan Confer-Hammond. I am the Executive Director of the Fair Housing Partnership of Greater Pittsburgh. I want to spend a few minutes today about what is current in the fair housing state in Pittsburgh right now. And so to get right into it is that you may be aware that the city recently passed an ordinance regarding inclusionary zoning. However, that ordinance has recently been litigated by its detractors. We are all certainly familiar with the litigation that comes from legislation in our city. But what is important for this board to understand and to know that the uniqueness about this litigation is that it was not filed in state court, but in federal court. The litigation is arguing that the ordinance violates the Constitution based on takings and due process. So recognize that when zoning began in the United States over 100 years ago, takings was the foundational argument that setting any parameters whatsoever for land use limits potential profit. That's the definition of zoning. And also remember that in 2021, just last year, the report Inherited Inequality, the State of Financing for Affordable Housing in Pittsburgh, showcased that over a 12-year period amongst 900 banks in the city of Pittsburgh, that 3.5% of bank mortgage lending went to Black applicants. We know by the math that public funds alone cannot mitigate the inequality of our housing market. And so I am raising this litigation to the board's attention because I cannot stress enough the importance of this advisory board's robustness and its decision-making, because it's going to embody and does embody that our city actually does value inclusion. In 2022, Pittsburgh is now in the national spotlight of federal court to defend zoning as a city planning tool that allows for safe and affordable housing for all of our residents. This defense is going to happen inside and outside of court. And Pittsburgh is arguing for and showcasing at the national level what our city's shared values are. And the HOF has a critically important role to play in that national narrative of who we are as a city. And so I want everyone to be well aware of what will be coming up over the summer as this litigation is moving forward, as we await the city's arguments in defense of the ordinance and look for a robust legal defense arguing our city's values of the ordinance not only being constitutional, but necessary and important to us as its residents. So that will segue me into, you may have seen in local news, additional stories will be forthcoming, but FHP has filed appraisal complaints in the city of, that occurred in the city of Pittsburgh. And those complaints are currently being investigated by the HUD Department of Fair Housing Equal Opportunity. And so what I want to underline before I go into the case details is that remember that housing discrimination does not stop based on income. No amount of money stops housing discrimination from happening. And so a homeowner in East Liberty, she had her house appraised. She's a Black homeowner, and East Liberty is 3 times, has a higher Black population than neighboring Highland Park based on the census. And so her home was about a block and a half, 2 blocks inside the line of demarcation of the Highland Park East Liberty border. And her home was appraised for $400,000. And then she had her family pictures removed. She removed her African tribal mask. She removed the art that depicted the Black individuals. And she had a white friend stand in as the homeowner. 3 days later, the higher appraisal came in at $436,000. $36,000 changed over the course of 3 days in the mathematical value of the home, arguably because of the race of the homeowner, the race of the neighborhood, and the race of the family who was presented as occupying the home. Later, the home sold for $447,000. And so what I'm saying here is that Pittsburgh is wrestling massively with the population crisis. We are seeing a depopulation at critical levels that threaten our standing as a second-class city, that certainly doesn't let us grow into a first-class city. And in order to attract new residents, in order to get new people to move to Pittsburgh, we have to show our values of inclusion, equality, and equity to attract those residents and to keep our current residents. This homeowner, in the local stories, in the local news that will come out this evening, when she talks about this experience, she talks about 20 plus years of acts of discrimination that have occurred against her. And so she is moving out. She is leaving the city. She is leaving Pennsylvania. And it is simply one person's example of what it means to be a person of color, to be different in any way in the city of Pittsburgh. And it's hostile environment when we don't create public statements, public shows, and public ordinances that support inclusion and equity. And so we must loudly proclaim and act on this value of inclusion, both to provide equitable access to our current residents, and again, to solicit that absolutely critical population growth. You may have seen nationwide that appraisal discrimination cases are being filed, investigated, and happening. I am hopeful that we'll be able to create possible policies that appraisal companies can use and consider as a means that we can bring back to this board for consideration with taken to other appraisal companies in the city as a means of adjusting how appraisals are done to impact and to change the systemic devaluation of Black-owned homes and homes in Black majority neighborhoods. I will close out. I always forget the time frame that I have, and to share that on the national level, HUD announced in April a new criminal history rulemaking. In 2015 and 2016, HUD released guidance and memos related to the use of criminal history in rental housing applications, particularly as it applies to federally subsidized housing and as it applies to an arrest that occurs during a tenancy in that housing. So HUD is now creating a rulemaking process to update its actual documentations of rules and regulations that are provided to federally funded housing providers in order to comport with an equitable concept of how to properly use criminal history as a means of assessing whether a person is a true threat to themselves or others, instead of using it as a basis to keep tenants out of the only housing they may qualify for. And so this is critical as we consider our gap funding that the HOF provides with how our federally subsidized housing providers are doing their application processes with regards to criminal history and how an arrest is considered while a tenant resides in the property. So there is a robust amount of information for this board to consider, to talk about. I am glad to be involved in the Fair Housing Committee, and I expect that next month we will be able to provide the metrics that we have been discussing for consideration as we start looking at and understanding that the HOF funds will inherently, by definition of the systems we have, not equitably be distributed in our city unless we take action to ensure we are working to address both the quality and equity in the housing market for our low-income residents. Thank you all, and I look forward to continue talking.
Thank you, Megan. Lots of good information in that. I'd like to double back to the minutes. We have been joined by a couple other members. I'm not sure if the record is indicating who's joined us. I know Jerome is with us. Paul is with us. They both joined towards the beginning, at the beginning of Megan's presentation. Has everybody had an opportunity to review the minutes from April?
Yes. I move to approve the minutes from April's meeting.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the minutes have been approved. Now,
That was Adrian first and Derek second on the motion?
yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
So can we go back a second to Megan's presentation?
Yes.
So Megan, again, thank you for presenting this morning. That was really powerful information, and I appreciate the highlighting of the zoning issue, which is something that I don't think that we've dived very deeply into, and I think it's something that we should continue to explore with Lawrenceville and inclusionary zoning policies, being contested in various ways, and what you had presented related to housing assessments. I think that this, the zoning piece, the equity pieces are something that it would be great for us to bring back into the matrix when we're thinking about projects and we're identifying areas where we need to do more work. And so I would hope that we can put that on the agenda as we're moving forward throughout the year to really be thinking more about targeted investment, communities, those barriers. And I know that we were hoping to have a developer forum sometime in the near future. And I think that if developers could also speak to those issues, it would be fantastic, because we know you're experiencing them. We know that you're embedded in those conversations. So for the folks who are convening the developers meeting presentation, I think that would be a great ancillary piece to bring to the table, not just for the benefit of the HOF members, but just the overall community conversation.
And I just would like to add, I agree with Adrian. Think great presentation, Megan. But it's important for us to really recognize you connected two dots with the inclusionary zoning, as well as what's happening with the appraisal issue, but really across all these the programs that HOF has, just how really equity, social justice, affordable housing, race, it intersects across the board. And we just really need to think about that, as it relates to every program and every really decision that we're making.
Thank you all. And I would simply put what makes this litigation such a hot topic is its federal nature. We are no longer in state court discussing Pittsburgh's second-class city status and the home rule charter. We are discussing zonings as a takings and due process in law that has been adjudicated for 100 years plus. And so whether we want to or not, Pittsburgh will be on a national stage with litigation that hasn't happened for some decades now. And it's imperative on us to have the messaging of who we are and what we value along with that litigation.
Megan, what is the best way for us to keep track of what's going on with that litigation? I mean, beyond reading the news, is there like a good source of information for us to stay on top of this?
Let me get back to you about that, Lena. I can forward the board the filing, if you're interested in reading the litigation itself, as well as my understanding is that the city's response is due by June 15th. And so we'll either expect the city to request an extension to its response, which is a typical procedure, or to file its response, which would presumably or could be a motion to dismiss based on a lack of merit. But what we want to see is the city robustly engaging in litigation that has a messaging that not only is this important, but is clearly constitutional as it has been adopted across the country. But let me get back to you about a specific ongoing source.
Okay, thanks.
Any other comments, thoughts, questions for Megan? Thank you, Adrienne, for opening up back up for questions. I apologize. I was trying to make sure we check that box before we go. And we've seen the Fair Housing Committee has been very active, as we'll report out later. So we've talked to Megan in smaller groups quite a bit over the last month, but easy to forget that not everybody has had the benefit of that exchange. So our next item on the agenda, I believe, is an update from the URA on our HAP and our small landlord projects.
Yeah, hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Derek Kendall Morris. I'm the manager of consumer lending here at the URA of Pittsburgh. Wanted to provide the board with an update on the homeowner assistance program and the small landlord fund. As I believe you're all aware, both of those programs have been closed and have not been accepting applications since sometime last year. But we have received the HOF 2022 allocation. So we will be reopening both of these programs for applications on June 13th. So we will be doing a lot of outreach within the community to let people know that these programs are available again. But if you could all use your networks as well to let people know that they can apply for the homeowner assistance program and the small landlord fund starting on the 13th of this month, that would be much appreciated. And if your organizations or your communities are having events in the next few weeks where we might be able to tag along and present and just answer people's questions about these programs, please let us know that as well, because we are trying to get this message out as much as possible that these programs are available for folks to apply. So I don't know if anyone has any questions at this point, but did just want to make sure everyone was aware of this announcement.
Derek, are you the best contact for both of the programs? I asked because
no,
there's a couple, there are probably at least 2 community meetings happening in early to mid-June in Hazelwood, where it might be helpful to have either some materials to disseminate or a speaker. And I just want to make sure I connect the right people.
Yep. So I might be stealing his thunder just a little bit, but in a moment, we're going to introduce you all to Jad, who's a new staff member here at the URA, and he'll be heading up outreach for the housing department. So he will be the best person to contact about, community meetings and having us come and present at those. So don't want to steal any more of Jad's thunder, so I'll pass it off to him, but he'll be the best contact for that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if you have any information, about those meetings, feel free to send them over. My email is in the agenda at some point, so you should be able to utilize that and send me whatever you have. But we'd be happy to attend because we want to do a few meetings to, just let the community know that these programs are going to be available again. So that would be good if you have one already set up. We can join that.
Be in touch.
Right, and you're able to continue with some other updates.
Yeah, so I wanted to let everybody know that Evan Miller is now the acting director of housing. So congratulations to Evan. And Evan, I don't know if you want to say anything to that.
I didn't really have anything prepared, but yeah, I mean, it's an exciting opportunity. I've enjoyed working with the advisory board since we started, and just hope to continue doing so. And we've got a great staff, kind of on the other side here of hopefully all the turbulence that was the first couple of years of COVID, and I think we can really up our game and help to keep HOF rolling and make it even more vital to the city's affordable housing efforts. So, hopefully you all know how to email me or contact me, email me, call me, whatever you want, but very open to new ideas and how we can continue to work well together. So thank you. And then I guess I'll return the favor that Jad has been introduced, but Jad is the new Housing Administration and Community Outreach Coordinator who's joined the URA in the last few weeks. And we're really excited to have Jad. Has a wealth of experience in just program administration and community outreach. And so we think there's a lot of good stuff in store for both this upcoming allocation plan and just moving forward with how we kind of get the word out about HOF. So I'm going to kick it back over to Jad to let us know a little bit more about himself and then kind of what his immediate plans are here for outreach.
Yeah, thank you, Evan. So like Derek and Evan had mentioned, I'm Jad Burns. I'm with the Urban Redevelopment Authority. I'm the new Housing Administration and Community Outreach Coordinator. I think that's a little bit different of a title than my predecessor, but I am replacing Bettina. So I will be working with all of you quite often in the future. So some of the things that I've been focusing on since I joined the team, and I listened to last month's meeting. So I put a community outreach plan together, and it's really focusing on 3 different things. We're trying to promote program activities and build partnerships with the community, increase public participation and feedback at these meetings, and having additional options for feedback, and then creating feedback loops for program participants and partners. So I did speak with Knowledge yesterday and briefly once before, and we want to work with the marketing and outreach committee within this board to kind of coordinate and unify how we're going to approach outreach activities. So that is something that Knowledge had offered to set up a meeting between us. So in the future, any of you that might be involved in that committee, just look for an email from Knowledge to set up a plan to meet and go over our outreach plan and coordinate with all of you on some of the activities you would like to pursue. Also, we kicked off the annual report process. So if anybody has any success stories that they would like highlighted in the annual report, please feel free to send them over to me by Wednesday next week. And that way we can get those into the annual report as that's due by the end of June. And same if anybody has any quotes that they'd be willing to do for the annual report. Typically we had, I think last year we had 3 in the annual report. So if a few of you are willing to do some quotes for that report. Again, please send me some information by Wednesday next week, and we can get that incorporated. We also have the 2022 AMI update, and this just has the chart of the new area meeting income summaries. Any questions for me about anything I just went over? Okay. And again, I'm looking forward to working with all of you here in the future.
Welcome to the team. Glad to have you. Look forward to working with you.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Welcome, Chad.
Jad's great. It's only been a month, but so far he's been very helpful and responsive, and I think we'll all enjoy his addition to the team. Which kind of leads into some of what he had left off on, leads me into some of our administrative items. We have been in discussion. There's a lot of overlap in committee members between the fair housing team and the community outreach team. And so since part of the fair housing conversation is having actual conversations with our targeted, the communities that we endeavor to serve, some of the conversations overlapped. So these ideas in this discussion, that's where some of it has generated, but it's also in follow-up to some of the things that we've discussed as an advisory board on our monthly meetings as well. So in terms of increasing public participation, but also keeping the board itself engaged, we have done a bit of discussion about the structure of the advisory board meetings, whether it's more helpful to be online exclusively. I think at this juncture, no one's really necessarily interested in doing exclusively in-person meetings, but whether or not we wanted to shift to a hybrid, whether or not 9 a.m. works well for both advisory members and for the community at large, because we haven't had public comment in quite some time. Whether or not we should alternate times, because we tend to think of evenings sometimes as being more friendly to working folks, but that also takes the assumption that folks are working 9 to 5 jobs, versus if you're in retail or service industry, then evenings are actually when you're working. So whether or not we wanted to alternate times, the frequency of meetings, whether or not we should perhaps move to an every other month schedule to allow for more work to happen in the committees themselves, and posting of the agendas, et cetera, making sure that we have projects to vote on, then setting aside those 2 hours every week instead of half hour one month and then 2.5 the next. Additional public comment options for advisory board meetings. Right now, we have public comment where you can not physically, but join via Zoom and leave up and share your public comment, or you can, there's an email feature where the agenda itself is posted. And so we talked a little bit about whether or not there's a way to have that be a feature where you can comment on the page itself around agenda items, so that we can capture feedback there as well. Something that we'd done in an allocation plan previously was had an option where people could leave feedback for the allocation plan by phone. So whether or not that's something that we want to have as an additional option for public comment around the agenda itself. And then so I think I'll leave it there. These are some of the thoughts that we had talked about. One of the other things that we had discussed was changing the timeline of the agenda for the advisory board meetings, so that we would send perhaps about a week before the meeting the agenda of our internal items for discussion, and then as they come in, because as we know, development projects happen kind of up until the last second, and we decided to have rolling applications versus having a cutoff, which means that sometimes staff is working on those packets up until 48 hours before, which is why we don't get the packets until the last minute. which is something that we're discussing, having what we would like to discuss as a board, those fair housing minutes, these sorts of things, a week or so in advance so people could generate thoughts on it and then put out the agenda as it relates to construction projects a little closer to the deadline. So these are some so those are some of the things that we've discussed, opening it up for comments, suggestions, feedback, discussion. Do we like any of these ideas? Do we hate any of these ideas? What are folks' thoughts?
Certainly expanding opportunities for public comment would be a good thing. And means and mechanisms for public comment would be a good thing. As far as alternating meeting times, my organization has monthly meetings. We've always had them in person until the pandemic. And we have definitely experienced a shift in who participates in meetings when they're in person versus online. Like many of our older residents don't participate because they're not comfortable with Zoom or don't like the interface or any number of reasons. But we've gotten other residents to participate. So I think participation in a hybrid format would be probably better than even in person, because people who want the option to join remotely can still manage families, can manage dinner, can manage whatever. So if that's a possibility, I think that would probably be a win.
Sonia, I agree. I think hybrid options are important. Also, just expanding outside of meeting time, the opportunity for folks to interface with the HOF, whether that's, we're posting a bulletin board and we're asking questions and we're getting feedback, or we're doing some of the tools with voting via text on things, or being able to participate. Sort of a virtual town meeting would be fantastic. And I definitely support getting the agenda for the HOF meetings earlier. I recognize it's difficult if we have projects on a rolling basis, but it's hard to be well prepared as a member of this group if we're only getting something the day before or 2 days before. I don't feel that I can give my best input in that kind of format. So I think the agenda and attached meeting materials would be really helpful for all of us being at our best for the conversation.
I agree with the hybrid. I think also just to have different kind of discourse and conversation. I think also just having a different outlet for the community to engage. I think there's a good thing about having a set time. You can really just plan your schedule and things around it, as opposed to it being alternating. So I'm not sure about that aspect. I'm sensitive, although I understand getting the information sooner. I'm sensitive to URA staff's, just kind of jobs and the changing nature and fluidity of the industry. And that may really, require or put a lot of pressure on things and even cause further delays, just because, maybe they couldn't send it out, a week or 5 days in advance. So I'm sensitive to that. I think we should be just as flexible. So understand the goal being getting it out sooner. But if it's a case where it's a day or two in advance for something that, that needs to move forward, I would be okay with that.
So in feedback, I guess, into having a set time, do you believe that 9 a.m. is the time? City council meetings, for example, start at 10, and there's generally people there because you have like that little bit of buffer in terms of morning transit time to get in. I don't know if that's, if we do one time, if that's something we want to consider. Also, I do want to echo some of Derek's concerns around the ability to get these agendas out in a to, in the time that we might like in advance, because it is, and that's one of the reasons that bi-monthly could mean every other month or twice a month, but the every other month version of bi-monthly meeting schedule was one of the suggestions, because within that month, it is a very quick turnaround time in terms of following up on what was brought up, discussed, action items in the meeting, getting that done, getting having committees meet in that month, and then also getting information out a week or even just 5 days beforehand. So just echoing that concern, but also how do we feel about 9 o'clock as our start time?
I like the idea of 10 o'clock. This is Paul, because I'm currently in transit taking my kids to school. So Pittsburgh Public, they have different start times. So if there's anyone else that has children that are in that later start time, that's just something I'd like to throw out. But I do like a 10 o'clock start time. I also think that, if we're gonna alternate, then a 3 o'clock might be another good time as well.
I don't personally have a preference, but what we did hear from members of the public was the 9 o'clock start time was difficult. Certainly the issue that Paul raised about getting kids to school or getting to work, we did hear a lot of public comment about the 9 o'clock start time just not necessarily working for a lot of folks who would like to participate, but cannot, manage that start time.
One thing that Jad and I had talked about that I think might be brought up in another date is, or maybe it's farther on the agenda, but is around the allocation plan. That is our biggest opportunity that we've had thus far built in for a public comment and feedback. And as we kind of, not whittle down, but I wanted to provide the public with some options in that survey piece to weigh in on how they would like to interact, which features they might find useful or appropriate, perhaps start times, or even if they want to get involved and show up to meetings. But those are some of the types of things that, since we're trying to get feedback from hundreds of people, that might be a good opportunity to double up there. But obviously we would like to have some options to provide them with multiple choice and not just a completely open-ended question. So I think that's part of what I would like to do there as well.
Yeah, I don't have an issue with starting at 10 o'clock. I think alternating times and dates can be a little challenging for me. I like to have, the time in there that I can kind of schedule around, sort of piggybacking on what Derek was saying. But I do think that changing the time might allow more folks to come for public comment and to participate. So I can support us starting at 10 o'clock.
I mean, most community meetings that I am at, those are all evening, and that's where people tend to turn out. You don't hold a community meeting at 9 in the morning if you're, doing neighborhood work or, community development sort of things. Is that something that the advisory board might consider as doing some of these in the evening? So it's maybe a lot easier. And we could do things with childcare if folks needed that. We could maybe provide that for folks that were coming in person. Try to, maybe have food or something for folks that they don't have to worry about dinner if they're attending. But, is that something that folks would be willing to experiment with and try?
I think on the allocation plan suggestions and kind of more specialized things around that, I would say what would probably be better to have maybe evening meetings, but the ongoing monthly meetings, which this is almost like a committee in a sense, I think it's better in the morning. That's just me personally.
I'm agreeing with Derek, and I think, there were periods when we need additional input where we do like to just have community listening sessions where, hey, we're going to talk for 15 minutes and try to listen to you for 45 or, an hour. Those can be deliberate. outreach engagement sessions where we're trying to get folks from across the city into a place in an evening occasionally. But, you know, if we have 50 to 60 commentators, public comments, you know, at our regular meetings, that's going to be difficult to get other work done.
I agree with, oh, sorry. I agree with Derek and Dr. Bay. I think that we might have trouble getting attendance from the HOF too if we switch to evenings, because I went to, when we did the allocation plan meetings, then we're in the evening, we had trouble getting advisory board participation in that. So if that were our regular monthly meeting, I don't think that would function that well, but I agree that it would be good to do special listening sessions in the evening for specific topics where we're looking for community feedback.
One of the things we've done is do meetings at noon. I mean, it's still kind of for people with traditional work schedules and those that might have lunch breaks, but it does provide an opening if someone is working during the day and has that opportunity. I also like the idea of maybe like a quarterly meeting in a different place around the city. Marketing becomes one of the challenges, but you know, going into the community, I think is a beautiful thing. And I think what we're trying to do is increase accessibility, right, to the process and to the information so that people impacted are part of the discussion.
And that's,
this is Paul.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Kelly. I was just going to say that I think that could we maybe move forward on the idea of doing 3 community meetings in the evening where we're inviting those folks to come out and have public comments, and then also starting our meetings at 10. There seems like there's at least some consensus just starting there. So those are 2 thoughts, but I think a third thought, just as far as other public comments, is there are ways that people can send video messages in or video comments that we could either play during you know, our meetings, or that we could have reviewed beforehand or something along those lines, or audio messages if we'd like to do that. So just another idea.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Spradley. Exactly. I think also just thinking about, you know, we're in a technology age. I understand everyone doesn't have technology. That's the intent around, you know, the additional public meetings. But, you know, one of the reasons of hybrid is to make it more accessible. You know, most folks do have a smartphone. I think the other thing is, you know, having a voice line where someone could leave a message, or some type of online platform where they can, you know, plug in some feedback. So I think, you know, we could supplement with different either phone or technology options for additional input.
I think part of it too is inviting people to public comment. So who's saying, like, to those that participate or receive funding, you know, our monthly meeting is here. Do you have public comment? Come tell us how it's working or not working. You know, like, that's something that we could be doing. And I think it would increase communication. I think people just don't necessarily know, you know, how or why to plug in, and maybe don't feel invited. So in addition to it being a scheduling thing, I think it's partly just a communications thing.
So I think a good point to add to that is we're thinking about the public meetings. They should not just only be about accessibility, but visibility of what the HOF is trying to do.
I'd like to stitch together a lot of these comments with, I think in part that's why we have regional representatives. So to Paul's point about maybe 3 regional meetings, we have 5 regional representatives on the HOF. And I think that it would be wonderful if, not by yourself, because we have a JAD now, right? But in combination, create a community meeting in each, you know, throughout the year, in each location, perhaps, that is both that talkback session that Dr. Bay was suggesting, and is also an opportunity to show off all of our products and services. So it could be like, hey, do you know who the HOF is? Do you know what we offer? These are some of the things. How do you want to get involved? Let's talk about your needs, et cetera. And maybe kind of solicit that participation as well. I think there's a lot of good stuff in it. I think that there's probably an opportunity to kind of layer it all together in a way that makes sense and is impactful and gets us a lot of bang for our time buck.
I think in general too, typically you hear more comments publicly when the public disagrees with what you're doing, and the direction that it's going. Not hearing as much, tends to, mean that there's less disagreement. Not saying we don't still establish additional outreach opportunities, but just that's something to always be aware of, that, less kind of feedback, typically means that we're generally going in the right direction.
I think interesting sentiment. And I think, customer service sort of shows us people voice their opinion when they're really happy or they're really discontented. But some of the feedback that we've gotten in different meetings is that folks feel that the public comment really doesn't go anywhere, and that there's no actual dialogue with this group. So some folks have just stopped coming because they feel like it's not valued and it's not impactful. So, again, when we're talking about surveying and connecting with folks, getting that sense of why participation, why not participation, what are facilitators and what are barriers.
And it's also, it's about letting people know what the HOF does, how it helps their communities and helps their neighbors, and also understanding that the resources are used every year, and we've only got 10 million. It might educate folks to, maybe want to push for more funding to do more affordable housing. And I don't think anybody sitting around this table thinks that 10 million is enough. Maybe I'm mistaken, but if we don't start doing things that engage the public and the taxpayers more, we're going to be at $10 million forever. There's got to be education and information that's shared. And if that, I think, we should try to do that in a more deliberate way.
So it sounds like there is some consensus around 10 and a shift to a hybrid setting, perhaps. Is that okay? Is this something that, Evan, I don't know if this is your lane or if this is David Geiger. Do we need to vote on administrative changes, or do we just kind of wait for somebody to scream no and then move forward if there are no objections?
Yeah, I don't know that the meeting time would need to be voted on or anything like that. I do think that Jad and I can do a little bit of legwork here on what's possible. And what I mean by that is, we use the city channel for this meeting. And if we want it to continue to be public, we have to make sure that there's not another standing meeting kind of at that time, or we can maybe find a list of times where there is a recurring opening where we can do this meeting. And then similarly, if we were to want to do hybrid and have it be a different time, we'd have to make sure that council chambers is also consistently available. So I do think we have to just do a little bit of fact finding on what's possible, but it is noted about the advisory board's desire to possibly move the time later.
And would the meetings necessarily need to be at city council, or could they be at the redevelopment authority's offices?
That's a good question. They could be at the URA. I don't believe it was legislated that it had to be at city council. I think originally, thinking back to 2018, there was sort of a desire to have just a physical separation of where this meeting was taking place. But I understand, a lot has changed in that time. And if we found it to be more important to change the time itself, and city council chambers was not really a good option for that, we could start to explore the URA's basement conference room or something like that.
There are some logistical challenges, unless much has changed in the last 3 years, which of course a lot has. But to getting anything streamed that's outside of city council chambers, because that meeting is pre-wired. They, like we did public hearings in end of 2019 that were offsite. They had to show up early with, like the camera crew had to physically go and remic the space. It was a little bit of a challenge. So that might be part of the rationale. Again, logistics could be different now, but I don't believe I'm not sure, but that would be something I guess that they would also need to check. So for July, I guess we'll keep the same time and space, and then we'll have a report for July, perhaps for what we can do for August and moving forward.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So I don't think we'd be able to say with certainty where we, what we could move the July meeting to, but hopefully at the July meeting, Chad can have some options for what the altered time could be.
And for a successful hybrid meeting, you definitely have to take Kelly's point into consideration. You don't want to be in a space where we're all looking into one person's laptop and trying to capture everybody in the room. The ability for, the multiple cameras that they have already set up in city council, any place that we need to find should also have that. Otherwise, it's just a weak hybrid experience for the people participating online.
Agreed. And I will say, anyone who, the URA board has been virtual for the last 2+ years. And I think what I've heard from the person who administers that is that actually doing a hybrid meeting is a lot more difficult from like an administrative standpoint, like having some people on Zoom, some people in person. So I do want to be cognizant of that. There could be some challenges, as Dr. Bay pointed out there. So we'll want to be mindful of that as well.
Great. Okay, so that's the first piece. The RFP is in progress for the allocation plan. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Any suggestions, changes, additions to that, other than some community feedback around how they would like to interact with the HOF, and even any specific questions for that, please send those to Jad. Is that okay? And he's going to send out the previous year's allocation plans as well for us to review, so that we have that top of mind when we're reviewing any suggestions, changes, or additions. And we'll get that pulled together, and we'll review that and get that out and running, because as soon as the calendar year starts, it's time to start thinking about how we're going to spend the next year's funds. Also, we had talked about briefly in terms of community meetings, and perhaps getting to a format where there is a standalone community meeting around HOF participation and feedback and what we do. We also, as we are shifting to hybrid and in-person allocation plan meetings, would be looking for a number of advisory board members to physically attend those meetings that are held in person, to get that feedback and participate and engaged with the community at those meetings as they are scheduled. So if you would let Jad know if you are interested in doing community meetings, and if the list is short, then we'll start calling on folks. But if you are, if that's something that you're definitely interested in, let Jad know. There are 17 of us, so not everybody necessarily will need to do one, but it'd be also nice if we doubled up and there were a couple of HOF members present at community meetings. So again, let Jad know if you're interested in that. If not, we'll call on folks, but it would be great if everybody was able to take at least one meeting, because I think we should, even if you're participating virtually, because I believe some might be hybrid sessions, but we would want for folks to see that we're out here, that we care, and for us to be able to get that direct feedback rather than just having it channeled through a form. And thoughts, comments, suggestions on any of that? Okay. Now we'll move on to committee reports for anyone who has met since our April meeting.
So good morning. This is I'm representing I'm actually the chair of the, well, two of them actually. Which one is it? The not marketing outreach, but the AAFH, sorry, committee. And we did meet twice, actually. And I think as a result of our meetings, I think it was going to be a AAFH presentation today. So I didn't really get prepared to like present. So I don't know if someone else from the committee is interested in giving a large rundown of the things that we talked about. I mean, I can go through my notes really quickly, but I don't know if Adrian, if you wanted to talk, or even Kelly.
We've talked about a few of them integrated in throughout the agenda. One thing that Megan alluded to briefly is that we are going to aim to have some metrics to review, because we, for July, often we can look at things and say, hey, we closed this many homes in this area, but what does that mean? Is that actually moving the needle? And what might a goal look like to actually close those gaps, so we can actually measure for success instead of, oh, great, we did 50 houses. Does that move the needle? Yes, no, move it in the right direction. Does that close any gaps? And kind of set some targets around fair housing in all of its forms. And so that's something that we're looking to have done for July. And I think the rest of it might have been integrated in throughout, I don't know, Adrian, Joanna, Mark, if we've missed anything else thus far. A lot of community outreach was topic as well.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that, but yeah, we will be coming back in July at the July meeting.
Thanks, Kelly.
All right, I think that's it for committee reports, unless there's any questions for the AFFH group.
I will say this, that even though the marketing outreach committee did not meet because there was some change in the URA staff, we will plan to meet coming up soon. So hopefully we can circle back to some of those activities and look forward to giving you a report. I know Jad has some things to share, but looking forward to connecting with that team and really having a robust conversation coming up soon. Back to you, Kellis.
All right, and back to the URA staff with program expenditures, updates, and forecasting, which is exciting.
And I will start off this segment by just mentioning that, a lot of my focus since I've started has been on the outreach plan and getting the annual report kicked off. So a lot of the data and metrics I don't have available for this month, but we're just going to give a brief rundown of these couple items here. And I'll hand it off to Derek.
Thank you, Jad. Yeah, wanted to provide, since we are reopening the program, and we've had some questions from advisory board members over the last few months about the homeowner assistance program and just, projecting, what would it really take if we were to keep the program open all the time, year round, from a funding perspective. So I just wanted to give some brief comments on that. So yeah, just to give everyone a picture currently of what the wait list for the homeowner assistance program looks like. We currently have 188 homeowners that are on the list, but all of those homeowners, are quote unquote funded from the different HOF allocation years that we've, and allocation tranches that we've received, from 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022 allocations for the homeowner assistance program. So they're all funded, but that left us with, no money for this program until we received this year's funds a few weeks ago. Last year, just to give a sense, when we had the program open for applications, we received approximately 200 applications. And with the funding we had from the 2021 allocation year, we were able to approve 79 out of those 200 applications. So, and then going into this year, opening up with the allocation that we have for the homeowner assistance program, we'll be able to approve and accept an additional 62 applications, but we do expect, that we probably will receive another 200 to 300 some applications this year as well. So, the need certainly outstrips, the allocations that we've been able to receive for this program historically. And it really, looking at that, just in broad terms, to keep the program open year round and continue to accept applications, we would probably, just based on the applications that we have received each year, we'd be looking at something like a $10 million program instead of a $2.5 million or a $2 million program each year. Now, that being said, everyone on that wait list, that I mentioned a moment ago, those are not all people who have been served. Those are all people who we have funding for, and their projects are in the queue, and we will be serving them. But, I think an issue related to just how much funding we have for the program is, our capacity and ability based on the contractors that we have connections with and who are interested in being a part of this program, the actual capacity to get through all of the projects that are on that waiting list. So, I think we would need significantly more funding if we were to attempt to keep the program open for applications all the time. But that wouldn't solve the second piece where, we would have an ever growing and expanding waiting list, but we still wouldn't be getting through projects any faster. So instead of 188 people on a waiting list, we would probably be, getting into a much higher number of people who are waiting for services. And those people may be waiting a much longer time period before they actually received, the services through the program. Currently, everybody who's on the waiting list does receive services and assistance, roughly within a year of applying, which is a significant wait time. But if we were to continue to expand the number of people who are on the waiting list, that wait time would get a lot longer. So that's just a brief snapshot of the current status of that program. And I don't know if anyone has any questions about that, but I just wanted to provide that as a brief update.
You may not have this exact number, but just sort of ballpark of the 200 applications received last year, 79 were approved, but how many do you think, does that mean that the other 121 were not eligible, or did we just run out of money? Could you have approved more?
We definitely could have approved more, Sonia. That's a really good question. There are a significant number of applications that we received that are ineligible, but we definitely could have approved a lot more than 79 if funding were expanded.
So then what happens to those people? Because 188, I got lost somewhere. The 188 on the wait list are people that we actually have funds for. They're just kind of working through the process.
Right.
Of the number that could have been approved, they aren't technically on the wait list?
No, and that's since, we run out of funding, don't want to take, and approve applications we don't have funds to support. And because it takes, at least a year for us to open those application rounds again. If we don't approve an application, we don't keep that information because it is their private information. And within a year, their income will change, their situation may change, and we would have to have them fill out a whole new application again anyway. So if we're not able to approve their application, then we do shred all of that information that they've given us, so that we don't have the private information of residents, if we're not going to be using it.
So those people, though, don't then have any prioritization over new applicants, even though they did the work to kind of get in the queue.
Currently, yes, our process is if they're not approved when they apply, then when we open applications again, they would need to reapply, and they don't have any sort of preferred status over anybody else who has never applied before.
That seems not fair. But I understand your point about not wanting to keep their private information around. But it seems like there should be maybe wait lists for those that are funded is not really the correct term. Wait list to me seems like that would be more appropriate for those who could have been funded, even if they have to resubmit. I mean, they did the work. It seems to me like they should have some level of prioritization over brand new applicants, in my opinion.
I mean, I think you make a good point, Sonia. And waiting list perhaps isn't the right term. A waiting to be served list or an approved list might be a better way to talk about it. I do hear what you're saying.
Could we just keep their contact information to let them know, perhaps even just like a week before, before applications open, to submit a new application for the new process, so that they're not hearing about it. Because like our windows of when they're open is fairly short, and they could miss it the next year.
That's really what I'm suggesting, that not that we keep their information and just kind of process it, because you're right, it gets outdated, people change jobs, all sorts of things can happen. But that,
hey, Sonia, like that kind of heads up.
By the way, this is going to open in 3 weeks, and because you were on our list, we're wondering if you've gotten a home equity loan or some other program. But if you're still interested, you have a window to get your information in before we open it up to the general public.
I think that's doable, to be honest. I think that is something we could implement. We don't have that information from last year, but we could certainly start to do that in this year's round of applications. I think that's certainly a really good suggestion.
I think that's critical. I think it'd be pretty infuriating to have to apply all over again. It's a big process. And if, I gave you all my information, I trusted you with it, I don't see why, you can't hold on to that.
So again, I think that's a really good suggestion. I think we can implement that for this year. That's doable for sure.
So it sounded like you said the need could be the full $10 million if we were to be able to keep it, if there were enough contractors, and we were able to just keep it moving on an ongoing basis. That 10 mil would do it, but then we of course would have a contractor shortage, which would not actually keep people moving. But that at least on the funding end, that seems like the number.
At least with the information that we have, because 200 to 300 applications is what we've received each year for the last couple of years. But that's only, we take those applications for 1 month. So the need could quite possibly be much, much larger than that.
So the need for the 1 month would be $10 million.
Well, that's, those are
that for the 1 month that we're open, right?
Right.
Wow.
So I don't think we have a good sense of what the true need is. But what we can say is we do receive, on average, anywhere between around 200, 300 applications each year.
Okay.
And talk about people that probably aren't going to come out for public comment that have a serious need, that have been waiting a long time. I know people that have died while waiting on this list, and I know that's morbid, but folks are frail and are facing challenges. So I wish our capacity was greater for this. I wish we had more money, like Mark said. This is part of making that case. Because I can tell you 60 people in my neighborhood that need home repairs, we're talking about 60 for the whole city. So, and have you seen a lot of people with barriers around their title, and are they getting referred? Are they getting help with that?
So, we do see some of that, Joanna. it's not a lot, but when we do get a case like that, we've been able to connect those folks with the legal assistance program and the Tangle Title services that the HOF funds are also supporting, and that's worked out really well. So we do have some success stories there.
That's really good, because we saw that as a big barrier when we were sifting through folks that needed repairs.
Yeah, those programs have been able to connect to one another pretty seamlessly, and that's been a good story. Thank you for your thoughts and your questions. Any other thoughts about that before we move to the next item? Great. Well, I do want to introduce Andrea Bustos from DHS, who will provide just a brief update on the housing stabilization program and how that has been faring, since we transitioned the coordination and management of that program over to DHS. So Andrea, thank you for joining us today, and I'll kick it over to you.
Great, thanks, Derek. And I'm echoing, so I hope that it sounds okay for you and it's just bad for me. So as Derek mentioned, I'm Andrea Bustos. I am the Administrator of Resource Navigation and Community Supports at DHS. Coordinated entry for the Housing Stabilization Program is going pretty well. May was our busiest month in terms of total contacts, phone calls, emails, in-person visits since pre-pandemic. The most relevant piece of data to share with you all is in the past 2 months, we've seen a 44% increase in calls relating to rental assistance. So RA is comprised of both eviction prevention and new move-ins, so first month's rent security deposits. We're seeing about a 50-50 split currently in calls where eviction prevention and new moves are being discussed. From August 2021, when we took over coordinated entry through March, we had only been averaging about 20 households that were eligible and targeted to be placed on the wait list for HSP, of course, due to ERAP. April and May have now seen around 50 households. So we did a pretty big jump, and I have a sneaking suspicion that June will be a bigger jump than that. And I will, of course, bring that information back to share. The current providers within HSP, with their combined capacity, are averaging a total of 15 households being requested a month to serve. That is obviously pretty low. We do have 2 providers that are consistently handling those households, and we have 3 providers that are now ramping up capacity to accept more. And I'm optimistic that that would happen by mid-June. And just another brief reminder that households that reach out to us and are within the city of Pittsburgh, we do always target and screen for HSP first. That's obviously the most flexible program, but the majority of the households are seemingly in need of more assistance than HSP can provide. So in those cases, they're being screened for and targeted for our ESG funding, Emergency Solutions Grant funding. It can give a little bit more in eviction prevention, and then also assist with rent moving forward for a longer period of time, and also assist in rehousing folks if the eviction can't be prevented. We're seeing about 75 households active on the wait list right now. So that is why my fingers and toes and eyes, everything is crossed for mid-June for those providers to have additional capacity to take those on. So again, I'm hoping the next time I give an update to this board, we will have a bigger number served and less folks on the wait list. Again, trying to be very optimistic today. But otherwise, going well. We're just, trying to absorb this bump in volume and hoping that there isn't a huge increase in June. But that's my suspicion. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. And I apologize for the typo on the slide there.
Oh, that's okay.
And then we'll hand it back to Derek again.
Thank you, Jad. Wanted to provide a very brief update on the legal assistance program. Just, sort of where, we are in terms of spending down the funds for that program. And also just kicking up that we will have a much larger update on this program at the July meeting. But did just want to briefly go over, with the $1.1 million allocation from 2021 for the legal assistance program, which was really sort of the initial funding for the program when it was launched. We have spent down at this point about a quarter of that amount, about $300,000 or so. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I think, to piggyback off what Andrea was saying, I think that there wasn't as much, demand that we've seen for this program over the last, few months because ERAP was still a resource that people could utilize, if they were facing eviction or running into legal issues with their landlords. But as that program, winds down this year, I do think, we've started to see things pick up. And we've also been working with the legal assistance program providers to come up with some new strategies to make the program more effective and to make the providers more accessible to tenants who are in the eviction filing process. And so that will be our update for the July meeting, is we do want to kind of present our plan for the rest of 2022, how we think this program can be more effective and how we're going to be pivoting the program so that there's more touch points, in the eviction courts, in the judges' offices and different places where tenants and residents will be able to connect with these legal assistance providers and receive the assistance that they need from them. So that's the update that we have for today, with a lot more to come in July.
Okay. Any questions for Derek?
Are there other agencies, local, well, clearly DHA, but that, focus on this and have, a lot more funding than we do? I'm wondering, this is just kind of a question I've been having to myself, because I think we're trying to do a lot with minimal funds, but is there another organization, maybe it's just DHS or DHA, that really we should be more referring folks to as opposed to trying to administer and do these services as well? Just curious of that question.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. And I think what we're seeing with HSP and with LAP to some extent is that there has been another resource, for the last 18 months or a little bit longer than that. And that's been the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, or ERAP, which was a federally funded program that was created in response to everything that we've been seeing with the pandemic and how that was affecting people's housing stability. But that program and the federal funds that were driving it are drying up, and that program is going to be shutting down this summer. So I think there has been this resource that a lot of people have been utilizing, but that's going to be going away. And once it goes away, HSP and LAP, that we are funding through the Housing Opportunity Fund will be some of the only resources within the city that people will be able to access for these types of needs. So there has been something, but that something is going to be disappearing in the next few months. So I think personally, I think we're going to see as we go through the rest of this year just how needed and how necessary these two programs are.
Yeah, absolutely, Derek. And
yeah.
this is Andrea again. I do want to speak to the fact that DHS, we do have additional funding streams for rental assistance, both eviction prevention and new moves. They're a little more difficult to access with a little bit more eligibility tied to them because they are federal funds and state funds. So HSP has always been the most flexible and accessible of financial assistance programs. So that's why we definitely target there first for the city. But we do have funding, homeless assistance program funding from the state. We have the ESG funding I talked about earlier. We do have a small pot of funding for folks who are specifically in Penn Hills. I know that doesn't exactly line up with the city of Pittsburgh, but we do have additional funds that we can target folks to. So HSP is the only funding in the game. It is just the most flexible.
And could HSP, HOF, HSP funds be a bridge, being that they're flexible, be a bridge to, just until the federal funds are drawn down. So a bridge to support someone, but because that will take a longer process, we use this, but ultimately those funds will be replaced. Is that an option?
I'm not exactly sure of the question. Exactly. I need more coffee.
Okay, I think it's a longer question, but you helped answer my question for the most part. We can follow up later to get more clarity around that, but I think I understand. Thank you.
Thanks.
I did just want to clarify that the ERAP program has ended. The last month that rent is being paid is May. And so I think that's really what was undergirding Andrea's concern about an uptick in June for requests. But I also wanted to sort of question the flexibility of our HSP program, because the ERAP program was very flexible in that, as I understand it, you really had to prove a connection to COVID, but pretty much everyone could, right? So it was easier to get approved for ERAP than even for our program. And then the ESG and the other programs that I think Andrea mentioned are harder. And so I wonder if we need to revisit our structure for HSP if we're really wanting to be more helpful and more flexible, given that the options are few and that ERAP is just it's gone away.
That's a great point, Sonia. And I think it really ties to our conversations that we're going to be having related to allocations. Maybe there are some things about each individual program that don't make sense in our current context, both because of rising costs, which obviously the developers have raised, and that's coming back in that developer session, but also what our dollars are doing in the market and how they may need to adjust to actually have impact.
Yeah, I think that, maybe we should, I think this is what you're saying, Sonia, but looking at, hey, could we use our funds that are going to HSP and just basically do a non-COVID version of ERAP and, really be flexible and be fast. $1 million whatever we're allocating to HSP is probably not going to be enough, but
Right.
you know, it at least would be maybe more helpful and easier to get the funds to the folks that need it.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting that this is a long-term play, like there have to be limits, but that we could probably be a lot more flexible than we currently are with our guidelines.
Maybe as part of the allocation plan process, we should, sorry to make more more work, but create some sort of spreadsheet around eligibility guidelines so that we can kind of look at everything at once as to, you know, who qualifies for what under what program. Maybe not as, maybe a spreadsheet's not the answer, but you know, some sort of cheat sheet that doesn't involve looking at every single application as to who it's for and what the eligibility criteria is, and see if there's opportunity to, you know, be flexible enough to meet the needs as they develop. If we can, you know, July is getting full, but you know, have that in place before we start to allocate money in say August. I think that would be helpful, at least for me. Nobody's shaking their head violently unless they're off camera. So if we could maybe work on what that would look like moving forward, but if we can start to assemble those guidelines in one place, that would be fantastic. I think that's it for expenditures and updates. We don't have our flagged map this month, as Jad had alluded to earlier. He's been really diving in as this is allocation season, community outreach, and our annual report season, all within his first month. That's kind of, I think, where his focus has been. I'm not sure if there are any other expenditures and updates that involve anything else, Evan?
No, not at this time.
Okay. It's hard to make eye contact in a Zoom. I feel like I'm getting better at it, but that might, it's probably in my head. So I think that concludes our agenda, other than any updates or announcements. Same bat time, same bat channel, first Thursday at 9 a.m. for next month. And we will explore some options now that we kind of know what direction we want to head in for that meeting, to be able to announce those in advance of August. And any other announcements that anybody has for the good of the order, for the good of the fair and affordable housing of the city?
I just wanted to thank Megan again for doing a presentation and her diligence of sticking with us at the HOF and bringing this information forward and helping us think through our work in these different lenses. So thank you again to Megan for presenting, and to Andrea for joining us and giving us that update on where we are with DHS.
Thank you both. Wonderful, wonderful partners to have in this fight and struggle.
Hey, Kelly, quick question. Will these community meetings, is that something that the HOF board will come up with? Will this be a committee? Is this something that happens in?
So there's a community outreach team, also led by Knowledge, who I'm sure would welcome assistance on that, but also in combination with Jad. I believe it has been outlining this community engagement plan, and I think we might be getting further into the weeds with that in July. But also, if you're in the meantime, I think as we're planning things out, if you're interested in the participating in any of those meetings, or even if you're not a neighborhood rep, but I live on the north side, so it might make sense for me to sign on to participate in something here, get that information to Jad as well, because I think we might have a schedule where we could have some folks plugged in going forward. But yeah, so you can either reach out to Jad or Knowledge on specifics on that. And
yeah, I was going to mention as well, you know, I did speak with Knowledge, and we are planning to meet together to kind of coordinate our outreach efforts. So I would, you know, highlight what Kelly said as well. If you want to participate and have input in that committee, I recommend that you would join us and let Knowledge know. So whenever we send out the invite for that meeting, you guys can attend.
I think that just the way we've woken up in the last 35 minutes is case in point for why we should start at 10 o'clock. Everybody's a little bit more caffeinated at this hour. But no further ado, if there are no other announcements or questions, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Adjourn.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for your time, consideration, and your diligent work over the last 2 months. And I will see you in July, if not
See
sooner.
ya. All right.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.